So, welcome. Thanks for being here. My name is Christian Denny Todd. I'm an adjunct professor here at Columbia in the School of International Public Affairs. And I'm also happen to be married to Chuck Todd, which is how he was unable to bail on me today. Fridays have become very interesting in this cycle. We never know what's going to happen on a Friday afternoon. You've heard about the notorious news dump that these campaigns do. Well, now we're all kind of waiting on pins and needles to see what's going to happen next. So as you guys know, I assume you do, there was a very significant news dump yesterday. And it basically, I had my little notes about what I was going to say, and I kind of like crossed it all out. So we also have here okay, so Chuck's here, so that's good. And then also we have my colleague here at Columbia, Basil Smikle. He also happens to be the executive director of the New York Democratic Party. That's right. And he's worked with Hillary and the Clintons for a long time. So that's us. Like I said, this cycle has been unprecedented, remarkable, amazing in so many ways. I have to say that I've been in this business for 25 years. I've been observing this process for a long, long time. And this cycle has been like none other. And I think we can all agree with that, right? As we say in the business, conventional wisdom has been turned on its head. And we're still trying to figure out what happens next. Like I said, I've been in this business forever, and I personally, when Chuck comes home in the evenings, I'm like, what's going on? I mean, we literally are trying to figure it out as we go. So, like I said, there's so many different aspects of this campaign. A lot of it has to do with the media and the accountability of the media. That's been called into question, I think more so this cycle than any other. And we can talk about that if you'd like. But I'd like to start. Let's go ahead. Oh, one other thing. Unfortunately, Chuck's got to get back to Washington, so we're going to have to leave right at 2 o'clock just so we can make a flight. So I want to get to your questions. But first I want to start with just this question. Chuck and Basil, give me an idea of what the status of the race is right now. Now, this was probably a different answer yesterday, but electorally speaking, give us the snapshot.
Well, thanks, and you're right. Probably if anybody else had invited me, I probably wouldn't be here. Given what happened today, I probably would have been stuck in Washington, or I think we have booked and unbooked Trump and Clinton like 4 times. I said we haven't unbooked them once. But the two campaigns do not know what to do right now. It's kind of fascinating. But they're sort of, they think they know what to do, but they're not 100% sure. But they do seem to agree on one thing, which is they think Comey needs to provide more information. It is the one unifying aspect of everything, which is both critics and so you name it, everybody's like, well, what do you have? This is not fair to the democracy to just sort of throw it out there.
Well, Chuck,
so
wait. Just to encapsulate what happened yesterday, so everybody's on the same page.
So essentially, for those that haven't read, very quickly, apparently, and the best we've been able to come up with is there's a separate FBI investigation into a gentleman by the name of Anthony Weiner. He is a former member of Congress. Some of you may know him. There was an allegation that he was sexting with a young woman who was underage. So there is an FBI investigation. They commandeered all of his digital devices, as you might expect in an investigation like that. It included iPads, iPhones, and a laptop. Lo and behold, on that laptop, his wife, Huma Abedin, only Hillary Clinton's closest personal aide, she used that laptop to email with Hillary Clinton. Ergo, they have discovered this. The story goes, on Thursday, Comey is informed of this, and he's like, okay. So he's in his thinking, he's got 2 choices here. You don't know if they mean anything or not. They hadn't gone through them because you have to legally. They did not have the legal right to go through those emails. They had a narrow, it was anything Anthony Weiner, but they discover this. They think it could be connected to another investigation, so they have to go through the court process. They do have to get legal do have to go through a proceeding to get the right to look at these emails. So Comey approves that and then decides he's got to inform Congress of this. He didn't have to do that. In fact, there's now, the Justice Department is saying that that was a mistake, because while no member of Congress had to release that letter publicly, what do you think they were going to do? So this is where we are. But to answer your first question, Christian, is I'm going to describe where I think the race was before this, because I think it then impacts where I think it is now, where I think it could go now. Before this, I think it was not a question of whether Clinton was going to win. It was a question of what would the margins be, and was there going to be enough Republican demoralization, meaning fewer Republicans showing up to the polls, that it would give Democrats a shot at the House. I think with a substantial win on the presidency, they were going to get the Senate. And that's where, and I do think what we were noticing is that essentially Clinton had gotten everything she was going to get, and she got that early. And then you were seeing in the last week some inching up by Trump, and what it really was is Republicans that had been sitting on the fence and sitting on the fence and sitting on the fence, essentially a term that we like to use here, coming home to their party, essentially. And that's what you were seeing, this sort of slow drift. It wasn't, there's a few bad tracking polls out there, but there was definitely something that looked more like Republicans coming home, not some sort of surge. Now you throw this out there. I think it can have the effect of really helping down ballot Republicans with a closing argument now. In the last week, you have had news about the healthcare, Obamacare premiums skyrocketing. You had a WikiLeaks memo that sort of really outlined exactly how Bill Clinton's personal finances and the foundation were a little intermingled. Nothing illegal for a private citizen, but problematic for somebody who's married to somebody high up in government. It is a walking magnet for potential conflicts of interest. And then, of course, this. So I think Republicans now running below Trump have a closing argument that says, hey, don't you want, and especially to Republicans who don't like Trump, you need to get out to the polls, because don't you want Republicans to watchdog Hillary Clinton? So I think they now have their closing argument. I don't think it's enough for Trump to come back. But I do think it could mean we are looking at a map that's going to look awfully like 2012. And it may be a margin that looks awfully like 2012. 20 million people have already voted as of this morning. I think she structurally, for instance, has put North Carolina out of reach. Just in one state, to pick one very important state. Structurally, it may be that this is, which then just does what Comey did, makes it all the more frustrating just to the democracy. No matter what you think of Clinton and Trump, you want all the information before you go to the polls. And so here we are. So I would say that's where we are today in the electoral map.
Do you have something to add there?
Actually, I don't have anything different. I'll just continue from the point of view of someone who is partisan, given my relationship to Hillary and to the Democratic Party. It will affect our down ballot races. We are in what we call GOTV mode right now. The last 2 weeks is about, by the way, hi to all my former students. Good to see you all. Thanks for coming. So we are focused on all of these down ballot races. I do think that the conventional wisdom was that at some point Hillary would be able to walk away, not with a substantial margin, but I always believed that the polls would close as they normally do around this time. I always thought it was going to be about 5 to 7 points, if that.
So more like
between
08.
Yeah,
More like 08
that's,
than
exactly,
12.
that's exactly right. What with Trump having a very narrow path to 270, I think it may have widened just a little bit, but I don't think, as Chuck has said, it's not enough to get him over the 270 margin. But it does substantially affect our down ballot races, because what will happen is, and mind you, ticket splitting is not statistically significant and hasn't been in the last 20 to 30 years, but those that would probably not come out on the Republican side are now, because of what's happened and because of where the sort of language that Trump has used will, in a way, be driven to the polls in a way that they were not a week ago. That's concerning because in New York State, for example, we have an opportunity to flip the New York State Senate, which has been Democratic for 3 years out of the last 70. And so this was an opportunity, and still is, I'm not going to throw in the towel yet, but it's an opportunity to flip the state Senate. We have a couple of key congressional races here in the state. In parts of the state, for example, that Bernie Sanders won, and we were counting on a number of those Democrats that have still been engaged after Hillary became the nominee to be able to flip some of those seats. I imagine that that is being replicated across the country with my peers that run state Democratic parties in other states. And now it just makes it a little more challenging because even if you were going to go to the polls and not vote for Hillary and perhaps vote down the rest of the ballot Democratic, even if you were concerned about or on the fence about going to the polls because you really didn't love Donald Trump, I always say that anger only gets you to 49%. You actually have to love your candidate to get you to 51. I'm not so sure that works right now in this environment. And that's what I think we have to pay attention to in the next couple of weeks. You talked about the WikiLeaks and so on. I also noticed a lot of really interesting and important news just for the conversation around policy, because remember, we haven't really talked a whole lot about policy in this cycle. But if you think about it, since 1864, this is the first time that the White House, the Senate, and the Supreme Court are all sort of up for grabs politically. First time since 1864. Yet and yesterday, was it yesterday that the Supreme Court decided to take on the bathroom bill in North Carolina? So when you put all of that together, I mean, there are really important conversations we need to have about governance. And 10 days out, we are talking about emails. You know, the GDP report, there was a report GDP is up 2.9%, and Trump only talked about 1% growth in this sort of sluggish growth, but good news for the president, for Democrats, it's up 2.9%. But we cannot talk about that. I'm not saying that the emails are not, in the minds of a lot of voters, a legitimate question and concern. But the sad part is that it has dominated the cycle so much that I have a candidate who is incredibly conversant on public policy, and that's not getting out. So having said that, I think in the next few days we will continue to focus a lot on our down ballot races, and I think folks across the country will. As I said, we're in GOTV mode, so we're gonna focus a lot on getting people out, sending folks to Pennsylvania, Ohio from the state of New York, and I know other states are engaged in that. But this is where it's not just about her winning; it's about what governance will look like in the next 4 years, whether we have a Democratic Senate or not, how our House looks going forward.
Well, it's a good point because down ballot, just a few days ago, I think I observed, Obama was out on the trail focused on down ballot races. I don't want to say that anybody assumed or was taken for granted that the top of the ticket was all wrapped up or done, but I do think that they were focused a little bit more on that. So, but to your point, both of your points, what does down ballot, the craziness that kind of this curveball throws for the down ballot races, what does that mean for Hillary's governing abilities? Because let's not forget who, she's been already, put through the ringer, so to speak, with Benghazi and whatnot. So now we have emails. So briefly, let's
look. I'll try to keep this answer brief. First of all, there is 10 days left. There's at least time for 3 more October surprises.
You're right.
Okay, let's.
That's true.
In a month of surprises, right? Look, I thought Obamacare premiums were actually going to be enough to save some Senate seats for Republicans. It was sort of, it is, because that actually, and in fact, there's evidence in Wisconsin that issue has actually helped change that race that looked like it was a done deal for Democrats, and now it is back. So there's been a month of these things, so let's not assume that there's not another Trump tape. By the way, Billy Bush and Anthony Weiner are the two most important people of this campaign. I don't even know where to go. But quickly on governing, it does matter for her. What's the majority? Is it going to be a victory of just her and a Republican House and Senate? If that's the case, a Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell that still has the majority has made a pledge on Supreme Court justices that he cannot go back on. Now, what's interesting is he is an institutionalist. I think there are plenty of Republicans that are just sitting there going, yeah, they should just give Garland, if she wins the presidency, do the hearings with Garland, get the new Supreme Court justice done in December, all is well. That was likely going to happen had she had a substantial victory and Democrats win the Senate. But now, that's unlikely to happen. It could be unlikely to happen. And even if Democrats get the majority, Republicans may feel as if they cannot at all give an inch. And because of perhaps how this election ends. So, if new presidents usually have political capital to do one big thing. A new president, Hillary Clinton, may not have any political capital. But what she has, she may have to use to deal with the Supreme Court opening. Because I would argue, when you line up your priority list, there's Supreme Court and there's everything else. Right. I mean, I don't think you can sit there and say with any certainty. And that will be one of the giant red-blue fights that you can come up with. And so I think it's possible it just completely shuts her down of governing. And if the House is still Republican, there's an important two-word phrase you need to get used to. It's called subpoena power. And if they still have, majority in the House means you get subpoena power. And I guarantee you they're going to keep coming. Mm-hmm. And so, which I do think sort of is, and then she's also got these problems with what we've learned in WikiLeaks on policy, which is she's not a comfortable progressive, and yet the ascendant wing of the Democratic Party is the progressive wing. So she has no room to maneuver. So the left is going to have her here. She may not have a negotiating partner. I think if Paul Ryan's there on his own and it's a Democratic majority, I think Paul Ryan could be a negotiating partner for her. Not on big things, but on little things. I think he would tell her, you give me little things, I can do little things. Don't make me do something big, which I think there's some truth to that. If there is one piece of optimism I have for her as governing, is that expectations are so low. And Republicans could overplay their hand. Where, you see right now, there is a rational majority in this country that is clearly fed up with our politics. And how do you see it? I look at Obama's rising job rating. He may be at 60%. I joked this morning, I think if you made this deal with the American public, we're going to extend the presidential election another year. Trump and Clinton cannot run. Obama stays for another year. You guys all right with that? Right? I'm guessing an 80% referendum on that one or something like that. So, but that's not the world we live in. But I think that I look at that Obama job rating number as sort of, that is a majority of the country saying not just that they approve of President Obama, but also, yeah, that come on, there is a 60%, 65% majority in this country that says, let's act like adults. And I think that's how she could get into a good governing period.
Well, we're going to miss him when he's gone. To touch on one of the points that you made, I think there is going to be a reckoning for both parties, both Democrats and Republicans, after this election. And Hillary Clinton will preside over that in one way or another. And with respect to governance, I haven't said this publicly much, but I will today, because we're all friends and it's school, and I can. The President Obama came in, and this I've actually said quite often. Republicans spent 8 years delegitimizing his presidency. Birther, everything you can think of. Mostly the consultants, my colleagues on the other side, because I do political consulting. Mostly the Republican consultants, but certainly they had partners in the Republican House and Senate. in delegitimizing this president. So you've created a situation where you can have the rise of a Donald Trump. Having said that, I think, and my concern for governance going forward, is that though I think she may handle it differently and perhaps even better in some situations, the country is even more divided now. And that is a little scary for me. And I don't want to put that on you, but it makes me nervous because, as Chuck has said, I think you're going to see Republicans dig their heels in deeper, because if they came to not like Obama, they have not liked Hillary for 30 years.
There's an industry.
There is a cottage industry.
No, there is an industry.
There is.
Rush
actually.
Limbaugh makes more money with a Clinton in the White House.
There is.
No, that's a fact. Breitbart,
that's true.
Breitbart's financial success is based on a Clinton presidency and a Ryan speakership, apparently.
And here comes Sean Hannity and all these other folks who, I mean, it is going to be a mess. I do think she's prepared for it, but the question is, are Democrats in the House prepared for it? Democrats in the Senate prepared for it? And why I say that is because of something that I think kind of goes under the radar, but it's been really, really important, particularly in this cycle. It certainly was important in 2014. Because President Obama came in without going through the party apparatus, he went around it, fine. But that's how he needed to win, and I think it was a phenomenal victory. He wasn't into the party building like the Clintons are. And what that does is it puts us at a bit of a disadvantage, those that actually work for the party, because we don't have the ability to sort of put the troops out in the field to get the message out, to be able to help our leaders govern. I think she believes in that more, and that's why I think she has a better opportunity to probably manage the divide, but I do think the divide is going to be deeper and it's going to be nastier.
Well, and let me bring up one other quick thing. You brought up President Obama. You know, within 4 days, let's say she's elected on Tuesday. 5 days later, President Obama goes on his final overseas trip.
Right.
And his number one priority on that overseas trip is to sell TPP. Right. So immediately is going to open a divide inside the Democratic Party, which actually gets me to one final point, and I know you want to get to questions because we're on a limited time. I do think this election historically will be significant, not for the name Donald Trump nor for the name Hillary Clinton when we look back on this in 20 years. I think it's very possible, and right now you have to clear your head of the FBI business here a minute, that this is the last election. We will see this as the last election, the final election of the culture wars in this country. My entire adult life, the red-blue divide in our country was essentially what made you a Democrat or made you a Republican was your position on basically a handful of social issues. This is the first time where we've seen, I bring up TPP because this was an issue that everybody's like, ooh, it divides both parties. Yeah. The point is this, I think North Carolina, and what we're going to see in North Carolina, likely ousting of that governor over that bill, that HB2 bill, that will essentially, the culture wars are over, the left won. Not to say the religious right is going away, but the religious right has been split this cycle over Trump anyway. Never mind that and if a Supreme Court is a generation headed in one direction socially, you essentially you're going to see more and more mainstream Republicans lay down their arms on the social issues. Yep. But I think we're going to what we're seeing here is that we're going to see a reorientation of the two parties. And the red-blue divide in this country is going to be basically globalists and nationalists. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean nationalists by the definition we see today, but more that will be the divide. Mm-hmm. And in 20 years, Paul Ryan and Hillary Clinton may be members of the same party, philosophically. Yes. And Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, philosophically, may be members of the same party. But I think that's where we're headed. Essentially, go to Europe. Right? Europe's been, you could argue that the left and right are divided more on economic issues than they are. I mean, Europe went through their culture wars a long time ago. Right? And the left won those culture wars a long time ago over there. I think that's where we're headed here. And in 25 years, our red-blue divide will be over economics and sovereignty, not what we see today.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm. And talking about the party apparatuses, both of the parties have been, their legitimacy, their importance has been called into question this cycle, mainly throughout the primaries. And I think both of them have been struggling with who they are, or they've come to realize that they're struggling with who they are. So the question, I think, becomes, and I'm going to throw it out there. I don't want you guys to answer right now because I definitely want to get, is where do they go from here? And I think all of that remains to be seen. I even think the observers all of us are kind of waiting to see how it fleshes out, especially on the R side. I would say, you don't have to agree with me, but I would say they're in crisis mode. And, and you probably, like me, notice, like during the conventions and whatnot, Republicans or the analysts and the former members of Congress or whatever saying, this is not the Republican Party that I know. You probably heard that more than once. So it's, and we have 1,000 examples, like ads and members of Congress that are very publicly running away from their nominee. I mean, it's unprecedented. But I think it's a good question, and it's one that we're trying to figure out right now. And then, like I said, Chuck talks to party leadership all the time. And, I know he has some thoughts on this. So we can hear from that later, but who wants to ask a question? I want to get to this because we only have about a half hour.
We got mics today.
Right here, Mike? You want to grab that mic? Thank you.
Oh, well. Hey, all right.
Here's my question. Do you think the dislike for Hillary Clinton is a different dislike than it was for Obama, and therefore can affect the way they govern? Let me be a little bit more specific. I think a lot of the dislike towards Obama was not philosophical. I think it was race-driven. I could be wrong, but that's my feeling. For the dislike with Hillary, I don't think it'll be race. It could be they don't like the Clintons, could be policy. Does that affect her ability to govern? Because I think if race is an issue, people are not willing to deal with you under any circumstances, because I kind of believe that's what gave and fed the rise of Donald Trump when you see Democrats going over reportedly and supporting the Republican Party. So will that impact not simply the fact that people don't like Hillary, but if that's true, how she will be able to govern differently than Obama, because there are certain boundaries that Obama can't get around because of his color. Policy differences can be negotiated.
That's an interesting question. There was a book that I read, and I can't remember the author. I think it was called The End of White Christian America. I forget the author. And it actually raises a related point, which is that as you talked about the religious right, and interestingly enough, they've been pretty pro-Trump, largely, given
The
everything.
leaders have, but we
The leaders
don't know. There's been some
Yeah.
rank and file a little less comfortable.
That's right, that's true.
You look at
And-
Liberty University, right, where
Right.
Jerry Falwell went one place and the students
That's right,
revolted
that's right.
a bit.
And I was on an interview when Jerry Falwell Jr. was on right before me, and we're all like, where'd this come from? But that said, I do think that there was a concern, and I don't know exactly when it started, because we were all sort of riding this wave of, oh my God, Barack Obama's going to be president of the United States. And then somebody from the floor of the House says you lied. And then Mitch McConnell says he will be I'm committed to making him a one-term president. And then everything kind of went left. We can argue to whether or not the policies had any impact, and some of them may or may not have. But I feel broadly that there is this concern about a shift in power structure, a shift in privilege, right? And that is something that makes people uncomfortable. And I do see that playing out on a day-to-day basis. Will Hillary have the same issue? It will be a similar issue. It won't be the exact same issue. I think people, as I mentioned before, I think Republicans have had this relationship with her that you're seeing now. They've been engaged with her for 30 years. And I think there are a lot more reasons for that. I do think she'll experience similar issues with respect to gender, no question about it. When I'm on camera, and I never forget, in 2015, before she was an announced candidate, I was on Fox News, and the panelists that I'm on were saying, oh, she'd be a great president, but would she really want it? I mean, she just had a grandchild. I don't know, maybe she wants to raise her family. And I was like, you didn't ask John McCain that. So why are you ascribing that to Hillary Clinton? So I think those sort of very overt racially, with respect to Obama, was racial with her, it'll be sexist, and the sort of microaggressions, I think you will see frequently, because we already have. So I do think there's some intersection there.
Look, I have a Democratic friend of mine that says Republicans haven't accepted the legitimacy of a Democratic president since FDR. That Kennedy's election was called into question. LBJ in '64 was a fluke because of Kennedy's assassination. Carter was a fluke because of Watergate. Bill Clinton never got 50%, never would have been elected without Ross Perot. Barack Obama wasn't born in this country. You know, my point is that he makes this argument that there are some Republicans who never accept the legitimacy of a Democratic president. I just wanted to echo the gender issue here a little bit. I do think that part of the rise of Trump is a culture backlash. If you think about what's happened in the last 10 years, put yourself in the shoes of a late 40s white guy whose father had a great job and pension with a high school education. He did the same thing and doesn't have a great job. He was doing okay, Great Recession, washed out his house. He lost all of this. Church-going guy, church tells him one thing, culturally the country's moving. And so in the last 10 years in this guy's life, what he thought was a white, male, privileged life or whatever it was, there's now marriage equality, a black man's in the White House, now a woman can be going to the White House. And I'm being a little, Bruce Jenner's now Caitlyn Jenner. The point is that there's this, and I think that there's something about a portion of Trump's support. And the reason why you hear these people go, he just says it like it is. He's not politically correct. I think there's something there. But it is interesting. I don't know if it's tougher. I've had plenty of women Democrats tell me they believe the country's more sexist than racist, and that the proof is the election of Barack Obama before the election of Hillary Clinton. And it is interesting to me that Barack Obama carried Iowa, and Hillary Clinton is not going to carry Iowa. There are Obama-Trump voters, and you know who they are? They're older, white males who essentially responded to Obama because they looked at Mitt Romney, and he's the guy that sent their job to China. So they supported Barack Obama. They don't have that same trust for Hillary Clinton. Is that because of her gender? Is that because Trump talks better on trade? I don't know what that answer is. But don't assume that her gender makes it easy. As you know, there is going to be some issues there. Yeah. No, I know you're not, but I'm just saying, I think her challenges, I think she has similar challenges because of breaking a different ceiling.
I had to piggyback on something you said and I very rarely watch Saturday Night Live, but if you saw the Black Jeopardy skit.
Oh my God, Black Jeopardy was genius.
Have you seen the Black Jeopardy skit? That, I think, is one of the best sort of commentaries on where we are today.
If I were teaching a class,
it was the best.
A political science class, I would have made it, and I would have been like this is a reminder that if you take race out of it, there's haves and have-nots, and the have-nots have the same struggles and beliefs, whether they're black or white. And that was the beauty of Black Jeopardy.
It was, and that's why there was a moment in time, very, very early on in this cycle, where Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders were saying very similar things. And that was, I think, where we really started to see, wow, the parties, things are changing in our parties right now. Because there were a lot of Bernie supporters that said they were going to Trump. I'm like, how in the world can you do that? But if they stuck to that, so those sort of very early talking points of Donald Trump, and that sort of stayed with them, that's where they get that shift.
Yeah, don't mind using the mic. It's just easier. So line up. It's all right. It'll speed our answers up if we are intimidated by a line.
If you guys saw Obama yesterday in Florida, actually, and you could see the energy. You could see that Obama he's very passionate about it. So my question is, he said the young people are going to decide this election. People below 35 years old, they will decide this election. My question is, do you think they will show up to vote? You said it is in the bag, but my gut feeling is it's not, and I'm a little bit afraid that this election is not in the bag yet for Hillary. And an unrelated question, who are the top 3 most interesting people you have ever interviewed? Because you met the most interesting people in this planet. Who are the top 3?
That's all you.
Oh, man. I hate answering that question because it isn't. I will just say this. I will tell you, people that I enjoy interviewing because they accept the premise of the interview. I will say this, for instance, I enjoy interviewing Joe Biden. I enjoy interviewing President Obama, though he's a little filibustery sometimes. I never have enough time, but if you have a lot of time. I enjoy interviewing Dick Cheney because he never BS's you. You know, so I go with that. That's sort of the way I judge, you know, as far as a sort of, it's people where when they're interesting off camera, they're comfortable being who they are on camera. And I'm always, you know, when you look at a Cheney and you look at a Biden, one thing you can say about them is that they are who they are. And in some ways, I think that you know, there's certain people I do not enjoy interviewing at all. That's probably come through the last few episodes, if you watch Meet the Press closely. There's one former mayor in particular that is, I don't know what's going on with him.
Actually, you know what? But that's an interesting sort of book after this. Like,
Yeah.
how many careers have taken a nosedive because of their association
Yeah.
with Donald Trump?
But you mentioned young voters, and let me just quickly go on there. I think this should be the fear of what the FBI story does. I think young voters just are not. Look, it's just clear they're not that enthusiastic about Clinton. They're not Trump fans at all. If they vote, they're going to vote against Trump, and they're going to vote against Trump in big numbers. But there's been a fear, A, that they don't come out, or B, they may vote Gary Johnson. And I think one of the reasons why you saw Clinton's lead open up before Friday is there were a whole bunch of young voters essentially sitting in Gary Johnson, Jill Steiner, undecided. The largest chunk was sort of young men under 35. And they, after the debates, started to move pretty quickly to Clinton. The fear that I would have if I were Team Clinton is that their enthusiasm goes down. And you know, Florida is going to be just a very narrowly contested state, and anything can cost you Florida, in either direction. North Carolina is a state that she needs a lot of young voters. Now, I think structurally, the early vote, that it looks like she may have done enough to prevent. It's just the Democrats are extraordinarily well organized in North Carolina this year, and they're going up against somebody who is extraordinarily disorganized. You know, if she were facing a Mitt Romney-like operation, which was not as good as Obama's, but wasn't bad, I would say that what happened Friday was enough for her to lose. The reason I don't think she loses is simply organization. It's worth 2 points, and I don't think he has so disqualified himself with enough voters that I can't imagine him being able to get ahead of her. He would have to be ahead of her by 2 points on Election Day, I think, to win.
No, I think that's a good point, and I'll just say quickly, you mentioned Barack Obama campaigning for her, but I also put a lot more, maybe a little more weight on the role that Michelle Obama has had in the last few weeks. I mean, she has really, one of the concerns that I had, and it's not just in terms of millennials, but one of the concerns I had even going into coming out of the summer into the fall was that the Barack Obama coalition had not properly layered on top of hers. There wasn't as much synergy as I had wanted to see, and I think Michelle Obama has done an incredible job at trying to weave those two coalitions
How about
together.
the fact that Bill Clinton pulled Barack Obama out of a fire in 12, and Michelle Obama is going to pull Hillary Clinton out of a fire in 2016.
That's exactly
And these
right.
are two families, let's not pretend they're best of friends, okay? I will tell you this, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, they do have a real friendship. They have bonded in ways that I think that it is, when you hear that conversation, that is legit. Bill and Barack, I think Michelle and Bill and Michelle, the real relationship is between Hillary and Barack.
I agree. And I think the role that Michelle Obama has played in bringing young people to Hillary Clinton, bringing African Americans, particularly African American women, to Hillary Clinton, and that, to be honest with you, that is the one demographic, African American women, that I was most worried about. The one demographic.
That's her best demographic group, isn't it?
It's the
Most reliable
I was
Hillary
most
Clinton
worried about.
voter is an African American woman.
And I'm still worried about it. We can't take it for granted. And I think Michelle has been extraordinary in bringing that to the table. And just broadly about sort of young voters, one of the things that I have had to do in my role as ED of the state party is, after Hillary won the nomination, is making sure that a lot of the Bernie supporters who were young, particularly college students, stayed involved and engaged. And it's been tough, and it hasn't been perfect, and it's going to be a work in progress even for the next couple of years.
Hi, my question was about media, kind of a two-part question. First part, do you think objectivity in media is completely lost? And then two, is the media partly responsible for the rise of Trump and also responsible for the attempt of breaking him down right before the election?
Build them up to break them down.
I know. I always ask every day. I had no idea I'm as weak or as powerful as I am on any given day, as people tell me. Tell me like how much power apparently I have in the media, or how little power or influence I have in the media. Look, I will say this. I think I'll steal a line from somebody, and I can't remember who said it, but it was always a good line to me that I think in this environment, which is transparency is the new objectivity. All right? I do think that in this day and age, and I think that the millennial lifestyle, what we have on social media, whether we like it or not, we have to accept the fact that everything is out there. So, own it. Don't own it. Don't hide it. So I go in that direction. The problem is how do you define media? Breitbart and NBC, are they both members of the media? They are. But for some reason, Breitbart never seems to, the activist media do the irresponsible stuff. The responsible media gets caught into, because a candidate brings it up, you sort of cover it, you debunk it, and then you try to do it and all this stuff. We get caught in our own responsibilities and end up elevating things that don't belong on air, right? But you feel as if, well, it's out there, you got to debunk it. So then we pay for the sins of these activists, those of us in whatever this middle ground is these days. So look, I don't have a good answer other than I view it this way. NBC gives me my platform. I'm responsible for my credibility. NBC doesn't provide it. When people try to paint me with guilt by association, I always say, look, come to me with something that you believe I've done incorrect, and I will engage you in a conversation. You give me this right-wing radio or left-wing social media claptrap broad brush stuff because Comcast owns me or whatever it is, I'm not listening. Use facts. Do this. And it's like, and with half the people that have this conversation, we have a conversation, and it becomes a more professional conversation. But look, I don't have a good answer. I think that let's, Roger Ailes spent 40 years creating this idea as a defense of Richard Nixon that there was a liberal bias in the media. And he, more than anybody else, he has done it since Nixon. It has been a talking point since Nixon. You say something enough, and eventually it becomes, and then he develops a news organization with this premise. Look, I think when you say nobody did more to create the conditions for the rise of Donald Trump than Roger Ailes. Without Roger Ailes, you wouldn't have the conditions for a Breitbart. Without Roger Ailes, you wouldn't have. So, look, I've always believed, is that his view of, and essentially deciding to put a political operative in charge of a news organization. Stunning. I always sit there and say, like, everybody says, the Clinton News Network or NBC, and I always sit there and say, there was only one news organization run by a Nixon operative. Yeah. Right? And it's like, if you did a poll that says, would you trust a news organization that was run by a Nixon operative? What do you think that poll would say? Right? Nobody would trust that. But that actually has been the case for 20 years. Right. So, there's plenty we do wrong in the media in the way we've responded to the rise of Fox News and Roger Ailes. But ultimately, I always say patient zero here is still Roger Ailes in where we are today.
I'll just be very quick. A lot of my students know this. I deal with the world like Family Guy. I refer to a lot of movies and TV shows as sort of reference points. One of my reference points very early on was an 80s movie called The Running Man with Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you remember that. And I remember there was a line in there where one of the characters, played by Richard Dawson, long story who he is, but he made a comment about the President of the United States having an agent, right, like a media agent. And I just kept thinking about Donald Trump in that regard, in many ways, because I have never seen someone at this level of politics engage the media in the way he did. We just didn't know. We don't do that. We didn't know how to do that. And he was consistently making news. And I know from our perspective, it was, we understood that in order to address something he said, he then goes around you and does something else that you then have to respond to.
Oh, I call it the spread offense.
The spread
You know,
offense.
it was sort of, if you follow football, it was sort of like he'd say something ridiculous at 7 o'clock, you chase it over there, and then at 8 o'clock he makes another phone or says something ridiculous, and you're like, something got through.
And to be fair, I mean, just to sort of be fair, because I have so many friends in media, to be fair, I just don't think any of us were really prepared to do that for someone running for president of the United States. It's one thing if you're, with all due respect to them, I don't know them, it's one thing if you're a Kardashian. It's another thing if you're running for the president of the United States.
Look, when you have a candidate who does not feel shame, because the basic way that we have been able to keep politicians in line is what? Shame. Ultimately, it's about what? You expose something, you feel remorse, you feel shame, you apologize, you resign, you whatever it is, depending on the level of seriousness. The brilliance of Trump is not having that. And I say it because, the fact that none of this bothers him, the fact that he can, many people don't have that capacity. But I think that is what has made him more challenging. We've never dealt with a candidate who, when you say, here it is, you've got him on tape, or, no, you said this, now you say this, and he's like, I never said this. And you're like, well, yes, you did. But I never said it today. You're like, well, what? You know?
And it's his surrogates, too. I mean, that's the thing.
Anyway.
I'm just sort of wondering what you see under a new administration in state governments and other governments that have most recently been using things like RFRA and other state bills as backlash against Supreme Court decisions. I'm thinking specifically to like how following the Obergefell decision, we've seen a huge use of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, as well as specialty state bills like HB2, and now with Supreme Court agreeing to take on the Gavin Grimm case, I'm sort of wondering what you see in terms of state governments moving forward under a new administration, as well as like if you can speak to this, why the Supreme Court takes these cases that are on sort of smaller issues that affect LGBT folks rather than larger things like ENDA, the Employee Non-Discrimination Act, or other things.
Well, that's a great question on the big stuff. Right now, I can tell you the Supreme Court is avoiding a lot of big cases. I was surprised they took this one.
That's right.
They've been avoiding a lot of them simply because they don't want to deal with 4-4. They know they're sitting on a 4-4, so they've been trying to only take cases that they think they can get 5-3, 6-2s, et cetera. So there's that issue. I think if McCrory loses in North Carolina, it sends a signal to more Republican governors and Republican state party chairs that, like, they've got to get these state legislatures in line. This is all because you've gotten this conservative. I mean, the funny thing is, McCrory, I think some emails came out about how McCrory was like trying to fight it and stop this and knew HB2 was a mistake. Scott Walker didn't want half of what happened in Wisconsin to happen at that moment in time. John Kasich didn't. You know, these legislatures are more conservative than the governors. I mean, Rick Scott wanting to expand Medicaid in Florida and his legislature not allowing him. We go, and it's not as if Rick Scott's some liberal Republican. This is not Charlie Crist sitting there in the state of Florida. So I think that a combination of what I would assume is a 5-4 decision if in the Fairfax County case on this transgender issue that will go in the favor, essentially, of progressives, that ends up, the combination of that and McCrory's loss, that by 18, this will, again, I truly believe we are at the end of the culture wars. That's my point. That was part of the law that I think, while there'll still be some energy in some places and some states, I'm not saying that it is, we're on the downhill. And that's where I see it. That's where I see it going. And I think there's plenty of Republicans who realize gerrymandering has undone them.
Right.
Okay? That they actually know that drawing diversity out of their districts has made them out of touch with America.
That's right.
Okay? There are smarter Republicans who get that this is a long-term, actually makes it so that eventually they could end up with a 90-10 split among Hispanics if they're lucky.
And that was the point I was going to make. I think redistricting has really changed how state governments work in a way that you're alluding to, which is that whatever the federal government is not doing, the states will gladly do. That's why down ballot's so important. It's why it's so important to people like me. And starting in 2010, 2000 really, but certainly starting in 2010 when we saw the redistricting and ways that we have, it's created the hyperpartisanship in D.C., but certainly within our state governments. Yeah, that's just to add quickly. That's why these down ballot races are so incredibly important. Lightning round.
Good afternoon. I have 3 questions.
Uh-oh.
It's the lightning round. So
I'm going to be
quick,
very
three.
quick.
Make them fast.
Three in and
Okay.
three out.
No, yes, yes.
All right, not a problem. So the first one, I would like to know what you think how this election will affect future of immigration. Second thing, how it will affect the student loan, because student loans is the rising issue. And also, according to all the news and everything, and I've been, watching on and off, I want to know what is the Asian voices in all these elections.
All right. Let me go. I'll go quick on my. I actually think college debt, her proposal, I think politically it's the first thing she ought to tackle. I think it's the one, she needs to give progressives a quick win. It's something that actually there are people on the right that are for this too. I think it's the easiest of the progressive promises she has made to actually get through in some form or another. It may not look the way it looks, but I think that's what she tackles number one. Because immigration, I think, will get tackled too. I think it all depends on the makeup of the House and Senate. And does she have the room to pursue a bill on immigration that is a path to legalization and not a path to citizenship? I ultimately believe she should pursue path to legalization for this reason. I think once you get to legalization, you can't constitutionally prevent citizenship.
That's right. That's right.
But if that's what it takes to get it, that you have to say, okay, there is at least a 12-year period before you even begin the process of going from legal to citizenship, because there is this belief among many Republicans that this is nothing but a pad the voting rolls bill. That is something, if you want 90% of what you want, I think there are reasonable people in the House that see that vision and will go there.
Right.
That's the way to do it.
Right.
But I think a lot of it depends on, if this is a 2012 result, many Republicans might come to the conclusion, which means Clinton wins, but Republicans hold the House and Senate, essentially. Many Republicans may simply conclude, we have the right, everything is correct, we just had the wrong candidate.
I believe that now.
And I do think before Friday, in a blowout scenario, that there would have been significant, no. We got to deal with Hispanics, we got to deal with it, and you would have had a faction of the Republicans more willing to work with a Clinton administration, for instance, on immigration. Right. And then quickly on Asian voices, I think I'm glad you bring it up. It is the fastest growing demographic group, I believe, in the country. And it is also one that Republicans, of all the minority groups, they used to actually carry a majority of Asian Americans. This is something that Barack Obama has done more to change the trajectory of the Asian vote in this country from essentially a swing vote to now a reliable Democratic Party vote. That I think you're right. I think Democrats need to respond better with that and have more Asian voices.
And very quickly, the work that she did here in New York when she was a senator, I worked with her. We spent a lot of time organizing the Asian American Pacific Islander community. We have a number of new elected officials here in New York, in part because of a lot of the groundwork that we laid in the early 2000s, working across the state, but certainly here in the city of New York. I know that that community within her campaign apparatus has actually been one of the most active and one of the most successful in terms of fundraising for her. So I do see that continuing in her administration from a policy perspective. And all I'll say with respect to immigration is, are they going to bring the band back together, the Gang of Eight or thereabout, right, for immigration reform? Where is Marco Rubio? And I'll be curious to see sort of where he goes after this tight race that he has in Florida, where he is on immigration reform. That'll tell me a lot, really, about where the Republicans are.
We were talking earlier about
Last question for me.
last question. We were talking earlier about youth participation. Given the discourse in this election, if you could speak to the impact to civic engagement across the country, local and state. And then second question, could we get a group photo when we're done?
Okay, with
Group
everybody.
photo. What?
Group
Oh, wow.
picture.
Oh, jeez.
Oh, wow. I'll just say very quickly, that is my big concern. I think a lot of the rhetoric of this race, the tone and the tenor of this campaign cycle will have a chilling effect, not just on people coming out to vote, but in terms of my job, being able to recruit people to run for office. That is something that's been a concern of mine for a long time. I see it changing a lot in this race because people are just stepping back and saying, I don't want to be a part of that. But I do think because both parties will engage in some reckoning after this, it does give me a bit of a window to say, if you want your party to move and shift, you have to be that catalyst. I am fine with, I got into politics because I've been in for 20 years, but I got into politics because I watched Jesse Jackson speak at the Democratic National Convention in the 80s. That was a powerful moment for me to see this African-American man telling the party, you need to be more inclusive. Years later, David Dinkins, who teaches here, becomes the first African-American mayor of the city of New York. More blacks, African-Americans, Latinos, women, members of Congress in state houses, and mayors of cities. That matters. Shirley Chisholm matters because they pushed the party to its limits. I actually am okay with seeing that. But I think we as party leaders are and need to continue to be more receptive to the folks that are banging on that door.
Look, I'm very concerned about, let me give you a stat that has rattled me recently. This is not political appointees. The federal government, just 7% of the federal government workforce is under the age of 35. Okay? Simple. The best and brightest don't see Washington as a place to go solve problems, right? The best and the brightest, they're going to Silicon Valley. Best and the brightest, maybe they're staying local. Best and the brightest, maybe they, 10 years ago they were going to Wall Street to make nothing, computer programs to make more money. The point is, Washington is chasing these folks away. I'm worried that the unintended consequence of this election is that essentially, I often joke that the collective IQ of Congress has dipped 10 points every 2 years because the smart people realize that we're there, leave. Smart people decide not to run because they look and see, geez, my whole life's going to be open book, and do I need that? And it just becomes more and more. So then you essentially only leave it to folks that are ambitious and want to do this as a career. And I think you need a mix. You do want some careerists who understand how the system works, but you need more new blood, a lot, and from different walks of life. And I am worried that almost both parties, they're drawing their candidates from a smaller and smaller pool, and then look, Congress is so dysfunctional that even if you win, the worst, then what do you? It takes you 20 years before you get to accomplish anything.
Right.
So I am only optimistic that millennials are impatient enough to break it. That's my optimism. All right, I'll stop.
Okay. All right, that's all we have time for today, guys. Thanks so much for coming. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
All right.